I gave this presentation about 2 weeks ago, and it pertained to nonprofit corporate structure and the role of the board within that structure. And it also talked a little bit about board member duties. I want to share this with you guys so that you have this information in mind as you continue to build your nonprofit boards. So, starting off talking a little bit about corporate nonprofit structure, I talk about this by comparing it to for profit corporate structure, just so that you can get a sense of what it means to run a corporation. Because a nonprofit is a type of corporation, it's simply a nonprofit one instead of a for profit one. But they have similarities, but they have a very clear and distinct difference. So, as you can see to your left, you have for profit corporate structure, and to the right, you have nonprofit corporate structure. Now, notice both of them have board of directors, okay, which serve as the governing body of the organizations. They're the key decision makers. They govern how the organization is to operate. And then both normally will have staff members who are normally either W 2 or 1099 workers. They carry out the day to day operations of the business, and they take the strategic direction of the board members, and they are paid to follow out those tasks. But the key difference comes at the top of the structure. Notice with for profit corporate structure, a for profit corporation actually has owners. They're known as shareholders. So they want to make sure the corporation is profitable, because the better the corporation does, the more money the shareholders make. So it's very profit driven. And the key to it is to provide a product or service so that the shareholders or the owners can make more money. And of course, the staff gets paid in the meantime while doing this. When it comes to nonprofit corporate structure, however, notice nonprofit corporations do not have owners. Okay. They do not have owners. What that means is that the profit generated from a nonprofit does not go to individuals or people. It goes back into the organization and back into the community. That money is supposed to be spent to make an even greater impact on the community. That's why there are no owners, because if there was an owner, then the organization would be operating on a for-profit basis, trying to put more money in the pockets of owners. So that's the difference. Nonetheless, the rest of the structure is very similar. And because there's a nonprofit, it's a nonprofit, then you can also, in addition to staff, can have volunteers that help to carry out. Okay, this is typical nonprofit structure. Okay, it could be simpler than this. In fact, it usually is. Whenever it just start out, there's usually no executive director or staff. And it could be more complex than this, and having several other board officers and a more complex employee structure. However, this is just a typical structure. So whenever you form a nonprofit corporation, okay, you have to disclose to the state who your initial set of board members are going to be. Most states require a minimum of 3 board members. However, you can have as many as you like. The maximum amount is up to you, but you need to have a minimum of 3. Now, within the board members, you have board officers. The typical board officers are board president, or in some cases referred to as the board chair or chairman or chairperson. You'll have the board secretary, and you'll have the treasurer. Everyone else would just simply be board members with no additional duties. Now, those 3 board officers are your typical ones, but you can have other things. You can have things like a vice president, past president. You have several things, several other officer duties, but you want to at least start off with these. Okay. So these individuals make up the governing body of the organization. They operate the organization according to the bylaws. I'm going to make a video later talking about what goes in the bylaws. So under the board, you normally have your executive director or the chief executive officer, the person that's going to be the highest ranking employee. They are employed by the board. Okay. They should have a great relationship with the board president and other officers. Okay. So they're going to take direction from the board. And under the executive director, you'll have your staff and volunteers. Now, the executive director role is normally a paid role. So it is with the staff that falls underneath them. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the roles of some of the members of the board, especially those three board officers. But the board members, of course, they have a fiduciary responsibility to the organization. They oversee the strategic direction of the organization. So a board should have strategic planning sessions. They should have a vision for the organization. So let's talk a little bit about the board officers again. So board president or chairman, board treasurer, and board secretary. Starting with the board president or the chairperson. So the chairperson or the president, they preside over the board meetings. Okay. They are the ones that usually will talk to the executive director the most. Oftentimes, they will also sort of be the face of the organization when it comes to media or representing the organization in meetings. So it's usually the board president and the executive director. If it's an organization that's fairly new and there's not a lot of funds or money coming into the organization yet, and you don't have enough to pay an executive director, then usually it'll be a board president that sort of takes that role of being the face of the organization, representing the organization in various places. You have your board secretary. So at the board meetings, the secretary will be the one taking the minutes. This is very important. And oftentimes they have the most duties of all the board officers because of the note taking that's required at the board meetings. So once again, during the board meetings, important matters that have to go to a vote. It is the secretary's duty to record what items are discussed and how the votes went, recording who voted for what and things like that. So once the meeting is over, before the next meeting, the secretary will usually type up the notes and then present it at the next board meeting to ensure that everybody agrees that what's documented is what indeed was discussed at the previous board meeting. And once it's verified, then the secretary signs it, and that becomes official minutes for the board meeting, which a nonprofit in certain situations might be asked to provide for various things in the future. So it's important that the secretary take their job very seriously. The secretary also signs several administrative documents as well. And then board treasurer. The board treasurer is the person who is the custodian of financial records for the organization. They should know what's going on with the organization's finances at all times. So even if you have an executive director or a staff person that spends most of the money, who has the debit card and things like that, you want to make sure that they're communicating with the treasurer. The treasurer is usually the one who presents the financial statements at the board meeting, letting the rest of the board members know how the organization is doing. They'll normally present the statement of financial activity and statement of financial position, which is the nonprofit equivalent to profit and loss statements and balance sheets. Okay. So it's important that the treasurer speak to the executive director before the board meeting so that they are in the loop and can present the organization's financials to the board. They should also be kept abreast of any significant spending that the organization might do in between board meetings. So that is an overview of board officers. I will do another video soon that will talk more about the specific duties as it pertains to serving on a nonprofit board.